What if one quiet morning at a grand hotel, a simple misunderstanding wasn't so simple after all? What if a woman everyone judged too quickly turned out to hold the future of the entire place in her hands? In a world built on appearances, sometimes the most powerful truths hide in plain sight. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Amara Kingsley tightened the strap of her simple canvas tote as she stepped out of the taxi, taking in the towering elegance of the Marquette Grand Hotel. The place stood like a quiet promise in the morning light, its white stone walls gleaming under the Louisiana sun. A grand opening banner fluttered at the side entrance, but today the hotel was in soft launch mode, just a trickle of guests and employees, quietly buzzing before the real crowds arrived. She wore her favorite worn jeans and a soft, clean white t-shirt, her hair pulled back into a neat bun. Comfortable, unassuming. She had specifically chosen this outfit to blend in, to feel like an ordinary guest walking into a place she and Dorian had poured their savings and dreams into. Dorian. She smiled at the thought of her husband. She could hear him in her mind, teasing her this morning. Going undercover again, Agent Kingsley? She chuckled softly. Maybe. In truth, she didn't want to be seen as the owner's wife. She wanted to feel the heartbeat of the hotel, to see if this grand, shining place truly welcomed everyone, or just the people it thought were worthy. Pushing the heavy glass door open, Amara stepped into the cool, perfumed air of the lobby. The Marquette Grand was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks from a ceiling etched with delicate fleur-de-lis patterns. The marble floors, polished to a mirror sheen, reflected every step, every whispered conversation. Soft piano music drifted from a small corner, where an older gentleman in a tuxedo coaxed melodies from the keys. The guests moved with a polished kind of grace, all tailored suits and silk dresses. Every handbag seemed designer. Every watch gleamed with discreet wealth. The staff, young, bright-faced, impeccably groomed, floated behind counters and along hallways, all warm smiles and clipped tones. For a moment, Amara simply stood there, breathing it all in, feeling a sense of pride stir in her chest. And then the shift. It was subtle at first. A glance too long. A whispered word. A middle-aged woman in pearls leaned toward her companion, murmuring with a furrowed brow. A young man at the concierge desk gave a tight, practiced smile, then immediately dropped his gaze, as if embarrassed. Amara felt it, the heavy, questioning silence that seemed to ripple outward from her spot in the gleaming lobby. Her fingers curled slightly into the strap of her tote. Old, familiar instincts whispered at the back of her mind. Shoulders back. Chin up. Smile easy. Move with purpose. Act like you belong. She crossed the lobby toward the front desk. Her sneakers, comfortable but plain, squeaked softly against the marble. That was when she noticed him, the manager. Greg Sumner moved through the space with the slick assurance of someone used to command. His navy blazer strained slightly at the seams, his gold name badge catching the light with each sharp movement. His eyes found her, and she could almost hear the calculations happening behind them. The smile he offered was thin and quick, more a bearing of teeth than a welcome. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, stepping into her path, voice syrupy and firm all at once. "May I help you with something?" Amara offered a polite nod. "Just here to look around. Maybe get a coffee." Greg's smile tightened. His gaze traveled too slowly, from her worn sneakers to her simple tote to the plain gold studs in her ears. Something flickered across his face, irritation, maybe, or worse, pity. "I'm afraid, ma'am," he said, lowering his voice slightly as if to keep the conversation discreet, or perhaps to keep it from attracting the attention of the better-dressed guests. "We are a private establishment. Our amenities are reserved for registered guests or members." Amara's smile didn't falter. "I understand," she said softly. "I was thinking of becoming one." Greg chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "Well, rates here might be a bit steep. You might find establishments down the block more in line with expectations." There it was. Polite words wrapped around an ugly truth. He didn't think she belonged here. For a moment, Amara stood very still, the background noise of clinking glasses and muted conversations fading into a low hum. Her heart thudded once, hard, against her ribs. She felt the sting, yes. But she also felt something deeper, a calm, steady flame she had spent years tending. She looked at Greg, really looked at him, and saw not a gatekeeper, not a threat, but a test. Without a word, she slid her tote off her shoulder, fishing inside with deliberate calmness. She found her phone, thumbed it awake, dialed, pressed the device to her ear, her eyes never leaving Greg's slightly smug, slightly nervous expression. "Hey, love," she said when the call picked up, her voice low but steady. "I'm here. In the lobby. There's been a little misunderstanding." Her smile was light, almost amused. As she ended the call, slipping the phone back into her bag, she caught the slightest shift in Greg's posture, the tiniest furrow between his brows. Good, she thought, her pulse finally slowing. Very good. For a moment, Amara stood frozen under the crystal chandelier, the polished marble beneath her sneakers cold as ice. She had learned long ago how to keep her face smooth, how to swallow the sharp sting of humiliation without letting it show. But inside was a different story. The weight of Greg Sumner's words settled heavy on her chest. It wasn't just this moment. It was every sideways glance from a sales clerk, every too polite smile from a doorman who sized her up before offering help, every dinner party where someone assumed she was the help because she wasn't draped in silk or dripped in diamonds. Her mind flicked back to a memory she wished she could erase, the first time Dorian had taken her to a finance gala years ago. The room had been glittering with crystal glasses and confident laughter. She had worn her best dress, careful makeup, cautious optimism. And yet, she remembered the way a server had handed her an empty tray without a word, expecting her to work the room instead of enjoying it. She remembered the way people's eyes skimmed past her like she was invisible. It had burned then, a slow, quiet kind of burn. And it burned now too. But this time was different. Amara flexed her fingers around the strap of her tote, feeling the coarse fabric ground her. She wasn't the same girl who had smiled through gritted teeth and pretended not to notice. She had built herself stronger. Not harder, stronger. Because there was a difference. Hardness shut the world out. Strength carried the weight and kept moving. Greg's voice, oily and clipped, cut into her thoughts. "I'm sure you're a nice young lady," he said, leaning in like he was offering some private favor. "But we do have an image to maintain here at the Grand." Amara looked at him, truly looked, letting her silence stretch just a little too long. She saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the way he shifted on his polished shoes. She smiled, small, polite, and it must have unnerved him, because he cleared his throat and waved over a security officer with a subtle tilt of his chin. A man in a dark blazer, earpiece tucked discreetly in one ear, approached with cautious steps. His face was professional, but his posture spoke volumes. He didn't want this job. Not today. Not with this woman who didn't seem angry, didn't seem threatening, just there. "Ma'am," the security officer began, his voice low, almost apologetic. "If you're not a guest, I'm going to have to kindly ask you to leave." The lobby buzzed with quiet energy, like a pot about to boil over. Employees fidgeted behind the desk, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Guests stole glances over newspapers and coffee cups, trying to appear uninterested while drinking in every second. Amara didn't flinch. She didn't argue. Instead, she lifted her chin, her gaze locking with Greg's like a gentle but unyielding hand pressed against a door he was desperately trying to close. She knew this feeling, the slow suffocation of being pushed out without ever being touched. She knew it all too well. And yet she stood. She breathed. Another heartbeat. Another breath. From the side entrance, Dorian Kingsley entered the lobby with long, purposeful strides. Tall, composed, every inch the polished executive. Dorian's presence changed the atmosphere the moment he crossed the threshold. His charcoal gray suit caught the light with each step, but it was his face, open, handsome, lined with barely hidden concern, that caught Amara's eye first. He saw her, and just as quickly, he saw everything else. The way the security guard hovered. The way Greg Sumner loomed, arms crossed like a shield. The way every head in the room seemed to turn expectant. Dorian's expression hardened, only for a moment. But that moment was enough. Enough to slice through the manufactured politeness in the room like a blade through silk. He walked directly to Amara, brushing past Greg, as though he were no more than a minor inconvenience. Without a word, he placed a steady hand at the small of her back, a small, protective gesture that said everything Greg had failed to understand. Greg opened his mouth, perhaps to bluster some excuse, but the words tangled up when he noticed the sudden ripple moving through the staff. A young woman at the front desk, her uniform crisp and her badge slightly askew from nervous fingers, leaned toward her coworker. "Isn't that Mr. Kingsley?" she whispered, not as quietly as she thought. "You know, the guy who bought the whole hotel?" The words passed through the lobby like a spark through dry brush. Suddenly, Greg's smile faltered. His posture stiffened, not with authority, but with fear. His eyes darted to Dorian, then back to Amara, confusion blooming into something that looked an awful lot like dread. He still didn't fully understand what was happening. But he would. Oh, he would. And Amara, calm and unmovable, waited with the kind of patience that only came from surviving far worse than an arrogant manager and a marble-floored lobby full of doubters. Greg Sumner felt the shift before he fully understood it. Whispers were spreading like ripples across a pond. Employees glanced at each other, eyes wide and uncertain, hands hesitating mid-task. Guests leaned in a little closer to hear what was unfolding. But Greg, proud and stubborn, doubled down instead of pausing to think. Years of working his way up through the ranks of luxury hospitality had made him confident, maybe too confident, in his ability to control a room. He squared his shoulders and raised his voice just enough to carry. "I don't care who you called," he snapped, voice cutting across the polished lobby like a whip. "We don't serve your kind here." The words hung in the air, ugly and raw, impossible to take back. A soft gasp broke the hum of conversation. Someone's coffee cup clattered against a saucer. Even the pianist at the far end of the room stumbled over a note. Amara didn't flinch. She stood where she was, her face calm in a way that only made Greg's anger spike higher. For a heartbeat, they faced each other, him puffed up with self-righteousness, her grounded by something he couldn't understand. The shift in the room grew sharper. Discomfort flickered across guests' faces. Employees looked at each other, silently questioning if someone should intervene. Greg saw it, the crumbling control, the sliver of panic, and it only made him dig his heels in deeper. Pride was a dangerous thing, and pride in Greg Sumner was like a blindfold pulled tight. Near the entrance, a slim woman in a smart navy suit adjusted the strap on her camera and raised her lens. She wasn't just another curious guest. She was a local reporter, sent here to cover the hotel's soft launch before the grand opening event next month. Amara caught the glint of the camera just as the first flash popped. Another, and another. Greg, so consumed by his moment of authority, didn't notice. But Amara did. Her heart thudded against her ribs, each beat loud and deliberate. If those photos hit the news, if this confrontation became the face of the Marquette Grand Hotel, the fallout would be catastrophic. Not just for the hotel's reputation, not just for Dorian's years of work, for the vision they had both built together, a place where people of every background, every walk of life, would feel welcome. The dream they had whispered to each other over late-night coffees, scribbling ideas onto napkins and daring to believe they could change what luxury meant in this city. And now, one angry man and a few reckless words could shatter all of it. Amara inhaled slowly, letting the cool air settle her nerves. She could tear into Greg. She could humiliate him publicly, the way he tried to humiliate her. Every instinct screamed for it. But she knew better. Real power didn't come from shouting the loudest. It came from choosing when and how to act. Amara shifted her tote higher on her shoulder and took a step closer to Greg, her voice low but steady. "Mr. Sumner," she said, the name sliding off her tongue like a challenge. "May I speak with you privately?" For a second, Greg hesitated, thrown off balance by the calmness in her tone. But arrogance was a hard habit to break. He sneered slightly and waved a hand toward the side of the lobby, where a polished oak door led to the VIP lounge. "Fine," he muttered. "Let's get this over with." The security guard stepped aside, his face unreadable, but his body language shouting discomfort. Staff and guests alike watched the two figures cross the marble floor toward the lounge, tension coiling behind them like a storm cloud ready to break. As Amara passed a side table, she caught sight of Dorian standing near the elevators, watching with a careful, measured expression. He didn't move to interfere. He trusted her. And in that moment, Amara felt something inside her lock into place. The VIP lounge was a quiet, tasteful room with leather chairs arranged around a low coffee table, a small fireplace flickering even in the morning heat. Heavy velvet drapes muffled the noise from the lobby. The door clicked shut behind them. The bubble of privacy wrapped around them, fragile and waiting. Greg crossed his arms, smirking as if he still believed he held the upper hand. Amara set her tote down carefully beside a chair and turned to face him. No anger, no panic, just the quiet certainty of a woman who knew exactly who she was, and who was about to teach a lesson that would be impossible to forget. The door to the VIP lounge clicked shut behind them, sealing Amara and Greg inside a cocoon of uncomfortable silence. The room smelled faintly of leather and polished wood. A quiet refuge from the tents buzzed just outside. Greg stood stiffly by the nearest chair, his arms crossed over his chest like he was bracing for a storm he thought he could still weather. Amara didn't rush. She took a moment to absorb the room, the muted gold wallpaper, the old-world paintings, the thick velvet drapes drawn against the daylight. It was beautiful, no doubt about that. It was everything she and Dorian had dreamed of when they first imagined their venture into luxury hospitality. She turned to Greg, her voice calm, almost conversational. "You know," she began, a small smile curling at the edge of her mouth, "I've always loved French colonial style. So has my husband, actually. It's why we chose this hotel, why we invested in it." Greg blinked, his forehead creasing. "You invested?" he repeated, the word slow, heavy with disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "Invested how?" Amara tilted her head slightly, studying him the way someone might study a stubborn child refusing to see reason. Then, with deliberate care, she reached into her tote and pulled out a slim, gold-edged card. She stepped closer, offering it between two fingers like a casual gesture, but the weight of it was anything but casual. Greg hesitated, then took the card. His eyes dropped to the embossed letters. He read the name once, then again. Amara Kingsley, Kingsley Holdings, executive partner. Color drained from his face. He stumbled back a half step, the card trembling in his hand. "You," he rasped, voice cracking. "You're with the ownership group? You're." Amara simply smiled, not unkindly, but with a calmness that made it clear she held all the cards now. Greg's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked wildly toward the door as if expecting someone to barge in and tell him this was some kind of mistake. But no one came. There was only the quiet crackle of the small fireplace behind them and the soft, steady breathing of the woman he had just humiliated in front of half the hotel. Amara watched him wrestle with the reality of the situation. She could almost see the calculations flickering behind his eyes, the career he had built, the reputation he had guarded, all crumbling because he hadn't taken a second to question his own prejudices. The satisfaction was there, humming low under her skin. She would be lying to herself if she didn't admit it. But another feeling wrestled alongside it, something heavier, something that reminded her of the dream she and Dorian had built, and how easily pride and anger could tear it down. Amara stepped back, giving Greg space to absorb what he needed to absorb. Inside her chest, a battle raged. She could demand his firing right here, right now. Publicly. Dramatically. It would feel good. In a raw, primal way, justice served hot and fast. But then what? The hotel's name dragged through the mud. Before it even had a chance to shine? Every headline talking about racism and scandal instead of the work they had done to make this place special? Her personal victory would become a public defeat. She thought of a staff she had met briefly this morning. the shy bellhop who had opened the door for her without judgment, the young barista carefully arranging pastries in the coffee nook. Good people trying to do good work. They didn't deserve to be caught in the blast zone. And Dorian. She knew he was outside that door, trusting her, letting her choose the future they would build together. Greg, meanwhile, stood frozen, holding the card like it might burst into flames in his hand. His arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw, fear, and maybe even a flicker of shame. Amara took a long, slow breath. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, but carried an edge that left no room for misinterpretation. "I'm not here to destroy you, Mr. Sumner," she said, watching him flinch at the formal address. "That would be easy. But easy doesn't build anything worth having." She paused, letting the words settle. "My husband will handle the official response. You'll answer to him. And believe me, he believes in fairness. In doing things the right way, even when people don't deserve that kindness." Greg opened his mouth to respond, but Amara raised a hand, silencing him. "But," she added, her gaze hardening just a fraction, "I want you to remember something." She stepped closer, dropping her voice to a near whisper, the kind of voice that slipped under defenses and lodged itself in the soul. "Sometimes," she said, "people lose everything they worked for not because they weren't good enough, but because they let their pride blind them in a single stupid moment." She held his gaze for a breath longer, then turned away without waiting for an answer. The door to the lounge swung open on silent hinges. Outside, the lobby hummed with low conversation and the clink of coffee cups, oblivious to the quiet reckoning that had just taken place behind closed doors. Amara stepped into the light, leaving Greg alone with the crushing weight of his own choices. The moment Amara stepped out of the VIP lounge, the air felt heavier, like the weight of everything that had happened inside that room clung to her skin. The lobby buzzed with a low hum of uneasy conversation. Cameras, some professional, some just cell phones, raised halfway, glinted in the overhead lights. She could see the young reporter again, circling like a hawk, eyes sharp, camera poised. A part of Amara, the fierce, wounded part, wanted to grab the nearest microphone and tell everyone exactly what had happened. To rip the veil away, to hold Greg Sumner's actions up to the light and demand justice on the spot. Her fingers itched for it. Her heart raced at the thought. But somewhere deeper, she remembered why she had come here this morning. She hadn't come looking for a fight. She hadn't come to play the victim. She had come to test this place, to see if the dream she and Dorian built could truly stand on its own. If this hotel could become the kind of sanctuary they had imagined, where dignity wasn't draped in designer fabric, and respect wasn't sold by the room rate. Amara closed her eyes briefly, inhaling the rich scent of polished wood, fresh flowers, and brewing coffee. She let the urge to lash out pass through her like a wave. When she opened her eyes, she saw Dorian striding across the lobby toward her. He didn't walk quickly, but his presence cleared a path. Conversations hushed. Even the clink of coffee cups seemed to soften as he approached. Dorian reached her side and, without hesitation, took her hand. His grip was warm, grounding. Proud. He leaned in just enough so that only she could hear. "I'm here," he said, voice low. "But this is yours to lead. I trust you." Then, with a subtle signal, he caught the attention of the hotel's communications manager, a woman in a smart black suit, and quietly instructed her to have unauthorized filming stopped. Amara looked around. She saw faces, some curious, some embarrassed, a few sympathetic. The staff stood frozen behind the counters, uncertainty shadowing their features. Greg Sumner lingered near the lounge doors, half hidden behind a column, his posture tight, defensive. His face was pale, his confidence shattered. Amara could feel every heartbeat of the room, the tension crackling like static. She knew this was a crossroads, not just for her, but for everyone watching. Slowly, deliberately, Amara walked to the front desk. She caught the eye of the young concierge, who hesitated, then slid a small wireless microphone across the counter toward her. Amara took it with steady hands. She turned to face the lobby, her heart hammering so hard she wondered if the mic would pick it up. For a moment, she hesitated, the weight of what she was about to do pressing against her lungs. Then she lifted the microphone to her lips. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I won't take much of your time." The lobby stilled. Even the pianist, sensing the shift, lifted his hands from the keys. "My name is Amara Kingsley," she continued, "and I am a co-owner of the Marquette Grand Hotel." A ripple moved through the room. Whispers, sharp intakes of breath, the shifting of feet. Greg Sumner froze mid-step, his mouth opening and closing like a man trying to form words that wouldn't come. Amara's gaze swept the room, soft but firm. "This morning, I experienced something that many people have faced in places just like this," she said. "I was judged not by who I am, not by my values or actions, but by how I appeared, by assumptions about what someone like me deserves." She let the words hang there, heavy and honest. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," Amara said, her voice warming. "I'm here because I believe this hotel, our hotel, can be better. It must be better." She paused, letting her eyes find the faces around her, staff, guests, even the lingering press. "Respect isn't earned by a price tag," she said. "And dignity doesn't come from a dress code. It comes from how we treat each other every single day." The room was so quiet she could hear the soft whir of the air conditioning. "Thank you for listening," Amara finished, handing the microphone back to the stunned concierge with a gentle nod. For a beat, no one moved. Then, a single clap. Another. And then the lobby filled with a slow, growing applause that wrapped around her like a wave. Greg stood frozen, his face a canvas of disbelief and growing horror as realization sank deeper into his bones. Amara turned from the applause, her hand still resting lightly in Dorian's, and knew she had chosen the harder road, and the better one. The applause had barely settled when Amara stepped forward again, her shoulders straight, her voice steady enough to carry through the marble hall, without a microphone this time. The moment called for something unfiltered, something real. "Thank you," she began, her eyes sweeping over the staff and guests, pausing just long enough to make it personal. "But there's still something that needs to be addressed." Her tone shifted slightly, still warm, but firmer, carrying the weight of authority she hadn't worn before today. "Effective immediately," she said, pausing to let the words land. "Greg Sumner is suspended from his position as guest services manager pending a full investigation into today's incident." Gasps echoed faintly through the lobby, followed by murmured conversations. Greg, standing stiffly near a side column, paled even further. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "We will conduct this process professionally," Amara continued, "and transparently. There will be no favoritism, no excuses. We owe that to every member of this team, and to every guest who walks through our doors." A ripple of relief moved through the room. Several employees straightened, exchanging glances that spoke volumes, silent acknowledgments of something long overdue. It wasn't just today, Amara realized. Greg's behavior hadn't been a one-time mistake. It had been a pattern, tolerated too long, because no one felt empowered to speak. Not until now. Greg found his voice, his indignation rising like smoke from a fire that was burning itself out. "I was enforcing standards," he barked, his voice too loud, too brittle. "We have an image to maintain. High-end clientele expect a certain level of decorum. It's part of the business." He looked around desperately, searching for nods of agreement, finding none. That was when Casey Morales, the young woman from the front desk, stepped out from behind the counter. She was small, almost delicate, but when she spoke, her voice cut clean through the room. "There's no policy," Casey said clearly, her hands steady at her sides. "We were trained to treat every guest with respect. No exceptions. That's what hospitality means here." A murmur of agreement rose among the staff. A few heads nodded. Even some guests, lingering near the coffee bar, exchanged approving looks. Greg turned red, then white. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, but the ground beneath him might as well have crumbled away. For the first time, he stood truly alone. Amara felt the knot in her chest loosen, just slightly. Not from triumph, but from relief. The hotel wasn't broken. It was strong enough to correct itself when given the chance. She exchanged a glance with Dorian, who gave her the smallest, proudest nod. Turning back to the room, Amara lifted her voice once more. "This isn't about punishing one man," she said, her tone softer now, drawing people back in. "Today is about something bigger. About the kind of place we want the Marquette Grand to be. About who we choose to be, even when it's hard." She let the words sink in before she continued. "Starting today, we are launching a new program called Respect for All. It will be part of our training, our hiring, and our daily operations. It will be a reminder that everyone, no matter how they dress, where they come from, or what they look like, deserves dignity and welcome here." A beat of silence. Then the first clap broke out, sharp and sure. Another followed. And then the room filled with genuine applause, not polite or forced, but full-throated and real. It wasn't just for Amara. It was for the idea that something could change. That people could be better. That this place could be more than just another pretty hotel in a city full of them. Greg slumped where he stood, the applause ringing in his ears like a judgment he couldn't escape. Amara didn't look at him again. She didn't need to. Instead, she turned toward the people who mattered, the employees who would carry this vision forward, the guests who would feel its impact, the partner who had believed in her even when she doubted herself. As she stood there, hand in Dorian's, she realized that true justice wasn't loud. It didn't always come in the form of public humiliation or a shouted victory. Sometimes real justice looked like quiet, determined change, the kind that didn't just punish the wrong, but built something stronger in its place. And today, standing in the heart of their dream, Amara Kingsley had chosen to build. The walls of the small conference room felt closer than they should have, the air heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. Amara sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. Beside her sat Dorian, quiet and steady, along with a senior human resources officer and a legal advisor from Kingsley Holdings. Across from them, Greg Sumner shifted in his chair, his palms flat against the tabletop, as if bracing for impact. Amara folded her hands neatly in front of her, giving Greg a moment to speak first. She wanted to hear what he would say when there was no crowd to perform for, no audience to sway. Greg cleared his throat, a rough, uneasy sound. I want to apologize," he said, voice low and forced. "To you, Mrs. Kingsley. I made a mistake. I let my assumptions get the better of me." He glanced around the table, as if searching for a crack of sympathy, a way out. But there was none. "I never meant for it to get this far," he added, his words tumbling over themselves. "I was trying to protect the brand, maintain standards." Amara tilted her head slightly, studying him. He wasn't lying, not exactly, but he wasn't telling the full truth either. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry he'd been caught. The difference mattered. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Mr. Sumner," she said, "the standards you spoke of are not built on exclusion. They're built on excellence, in service, in dignity, in humanity." Greg's shoulders slumped. For the first time, it seemed he truly saw the walls closing in. "You have the right to apologize," Amara continued, her tone even. "But understand that an apology doesn't erase the consequences." Greg flinched at the word consequences. He knew what was coming, but she wasn't finished. The human resources officer slid a document across the table toward him, the sound of paper against wood unervingly loud. "This," Amara said, tapping the page lightly, "is a non-disparagement agreement. By signing it, you agree not to bring any legal claims against the Marquette Grand Hotel or Kingsley Holdings. You also agree not to publicly comment in a way that could harm the reputation of the hotel or its staff." Greg stared at the paper, his mouth a hard line. For a moment, Amara thought he might refuse. Pride was a stubborn thing, but pride had already cost him everything. With a stiff hand, Greg picked up the pen and signed his name, the ink dark and final against the page. Dorian leaned forward slightly, his voice cool and professional. "Effective immediately," Dorian said, "you are barred from employment in any property owned or affiliated with Kingsley Holdings." Greg didn't argue. He just sat there, shoulders sagging, as the reality of his downfall settled heavy on him. Amara offered him a small, polite nod, not out of malice, but because there was nothing more to say. The meeting ended without ceremony. Greg stood slowly, gathered what little dignity he had left, and walked out of the conference room. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, fading into nothing. Amara remained seated for a moment longer, letting the stillness settle around her. She wasn't proud of what had happened. She wasn't triumphant, but she was at peace. Later, she found herself standing on the second-floor balcony, overlooking the grand lobby. The sunlight streamed in through the towering windows, painting the marble floors in gold and soft blue. Staff moved with quiet purpose below. Guests chatted over coffee, the life of the hotel humming back to its natural rhythm. She rested her hands lightly on the cool iron railing, taking it all in. This place, this dream, had been tested. And it had endured. Not because of anger, not because of vengeance, but because, when it mattered most, she had chosen to build, not to burn. Dorian joined her, slipping his hand into hers without a word. They stood together, watching the light pour in, feeling the new beginning take shape all around them. Amara smiled to herself, a quiet, knowing smile. A chapter had closed today, and in its place a new story was just beginning, one she would help write day by day, with dignity, courage, and the unshakable belief that the best kind of power was the kind that lifted everyone higher. The late afternoon sun dipped low behind the old brick buildings as Amara and Dorian sat side by side at a small table near the window of Café Lumière. The place had a quiet charm to it, a creaky wood floor, mismatched chairs, the warm scent of fresh coffee lingering in the air. It was here, just months ago, that they had first whispered about their hopes for the Marquette Grand Hotel. Back then, it had all seemed so far away, just scribbled dreams on the back of napkins, fueled by too much caffeine and just enough stubborn belief. Now, after everything, it was real. And it was hers too, not just Dorian's vision, not just some gilded property to add to a portfolio, but a living, breathing promise of what could be built when dignity and kindness were made the foundation, not an afterthought. Amara stirred her coffee absently, watching the cream swirl into soft clouds. She felt lighter than she had in days, but a part of her still carried the ache of old fears, the kind that didn't vanish with applause or contracts signed in ink. "I didn't know if I could do it," she said finally, her voice low. "Part of me kept waiting to slip up, to prove all the people like Greg right, that I didn't belong in that world." Dorian reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing lazy circles against her skin. "You didn't just belong, Amara," he said, his voice steady and full of quiet pride. "You changed it. You didn't fight their way. You showed them a better one." She smiled, small but genuine, the knot in her chest loosening another notch. Outside the cafe window, life moved on, a woman pushing a stroller, a pair of teenagers laughing too loudly, a man balancing 2 bags of groceries and a takeaway coffee. Ordinary, beautiful life. And somewhere in the city, Greg Sumner was waking up to a very different reality. The internal announcement had gone out that morning. Greg's employment officially terminated due to violations of the company's core values and ethical standards. It hadn't made headlines. Amara had insisted on that. She didn't want revenge dressed up as justice. What mattered wasn't the spectacle of his fall, but the sturdiness of the future they were building without him. In the same breath, Kingsley Holdings had introduced their new Respect for All training initiative, designed not just for the Marquette Grand, but for every property they managed. Word traveled fast. Other hotels around New Orleans, even those outside the Kingsley network, began quietly updating their own standards, unwilling to be left behind in a shifting tide. It wasn't a revolution overnight. It was slower, steadier than that, like water carving new paths through stone. 1 month later, under a sky so blue it seemed almost painted, Amara stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Marquette Grand Hotel. The official launch had finally arrived, the ribbons, the speeches, the polished smiles for photographers. But as she looked out over the gathered crowd, it didn't feel like a show. It felt like a beginning. The room was filled with faces, old and young, black and white, and every shade between, dressed in everything from tailored suits to well-loved Sunday best. She cleared her throat lightly, the microphone humming beneath her touch. "Today," Amara said, her voice strong and clear, "we are not just opening a hotel. We are opening a home, a place where every person who walks through our doors is greeted with dignity, respect, and genuine welcome." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the room, connecting, not performing. It doesn't matter what you wear. It doesn't matter what you drive. It doesn't matter how much you have in your bank account. Here, you matter because you are you. The words hung there, soft but unbreakable. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then the applause came, slow at first, then swelling into something warm and full, wrapping around her like sunlight. Amara smiled, blinking back a sudden sting behind her eyes. She caught sight of Dorian near the front, his smile wide and unguarded. She spotted Casey Morales too, standing with a small group of employees, her posture straight with pride. Even a few familiar faces from Café Lumière were there, lifting their cups in a subtle salute. This was what they had built. Not just a place to sleep or dine or spend money. A place where everyone could belong. As the music swelled and the crowd rose to mingle, Amara stepped back from the podium, feeling a quiet, fierce joy settle into her bones. It wasn't the end of the story. It was just the start of something better. A new chapter. A new way. A new beginning. In a world that often rushes to judge by appearances, today's story reminds us, true worth isn't worn on the outside. It's carried in how we choose to treat one another. What would our communities look like if we all chose respect over assumptions? Think about it. And if this story touched you, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next journey we'll take together.